For over a century, fairies have been imagined as tiny, glowing creatures with wings. Gentle, magical, harmless. But that version is very new. In older folklore, fairies were not cute. They were not innocent. And they were not always small. They were powerful beings from another world, feared by rural communities, blamed for disappearances, sickness, bad luck, and strange events that seemed to cross the border between nature and the supernatural. And one of the strangest moments in fairy history began with 5 photographs. In 1917, 2 young girls in Cottingley, England, claimed they had photographed real fairies. The images showed small winged figures dancing near a stream. To modern eyes, they look almost theatrical. But at the time, many people believed they might be real. One of those people was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the creator of Sherlock Holmes.
Doyle, deeply interested in spiritualism, accepted the photographs as possible evidence of unseen beings. He even helped bring them to public attention. Decades later, the Cottingley Fairies were confirmed as a hoax. The figures had been cut from illustrations and staged for the camera. But the damage, or maybe the transformation, had already happened. Fairies had entered the modern imagination as delicate little creatures. The problem is, that was never the whole story. Long before fairies became children's fantasy, they belonged to a darker world. In Irish folklore, one of the most important names for these beings is the Aos Sí, often pronounced Aos Sí. The phrase is commonly understood as the people of the mounds. These were not cartoon sprites. They were otherworldly beings connected to ancient burial mounds, hills, underground places, and invisible realms that existed beside the human world. In many stories, the mounds were not just piles of earth, they were entrances. A lonely hill in the countryside might be more than a hill. It might be a doorway into the realm of the Fae. And that doorway was dangerous. People did not speak of the Aos Sí lightly. In some traditions, they were called the good people, not because they were always good, but because it was safer to flatter them. You did not insult them. You did not disturb their places. You did not take what belonged to them. Because the Fae were not seen as evil in a simple way. They were worse than that. They were unpredictable. They could bless a household or ruin it. They could offer music, beauty, and impossible wealth. Or they could steal a child. One of the darkest fairy beliefs was the changeling. In folklore, a changeling was a fairy substitute left in place of a human child. A baby might suddenly become sick, strange, weak, or different, and fearful communities sometimes believed the real child had been taken by the fairies. Today, these stories are often understood through the lens of illness, disability, grief, and fear. But in the world that created them, changeling legends were terrifying explanations for suffering that people could not understand. The fairy realm was not a safe wonderland, it was a borderland, and humans were not in control there. This is why old fairy folklore is filled with rules for survival. One of the most famous protections was cold iron. In many European traditions, iron was believed to repel or harm supernatural beings, including fairies. A nail, a horseshoe, or an iron object could become a shield against the unseen. The exact belief changed from place to place, but the message was clear. The Fae had power, and humans needed protection. Another warning concerned fairy rings. A fairy ring is a natural circle of mushrooms, often caused by fungi growing outward underground. But in folklore, these circles were said to mark the places where fairies danced. To step inside one could be dangerous. Some stories claimed a person might be forced to dance until exhaustion. Others said time itself could twist inside the ring. A few minutes with the fairies might become years in the human world. Then there was the rule of fairy food. Never eat it. In legend, accepting food or drink in the fairy realm could trap a person there. It could bind them to the other world, making return impossible, or changing them so deeply that they no longer belonged among humans. This idea appears again and again in folklore. The fairy world offers beauty, but every gift has a cost. That is the key difference between old fairy lore and modern fantasy. The old stories were not asking, "What if magic is wonderful?" They were asking, "What if magic is beautiful because it is dangerous?" But somewhere along the way,
fairies changed. They became smaller, softer, less threatening. The Victorian era played a major role in that transformation. During the 1800s, fairies became popular in art, poetry, theater, children's books, and decorative illustration. They were painted with wings, placed among flowers, and imagined as delicate spirits of the garden. This did not erase the older folklore completely, but it changed the image. The terrifying beings of the mounds slowly became tiny winged creatures. The dangerous neighbor from the otherworld became a symbol of childhood imagination. By the time modern fantasy and animation took over, fairies had been mostly cleaned of their older darkness. They became helpers, wish granters, cute companions. But beneath that bright surface, the older fear never fully disappeared. It remained in the rules. Do not follow the music. Do not enter the ring. Do not disturb the mound. Do not eat the food. Do not assume they are kind. This older fear still survives in modern Ireland and beyond. One of the clearest examples is the fairy tree. In Irish tradition, certain lone trees, especially hawthorns, have been linked to fairy belief. A tree standing by itself in a field may be treated with caution, not because it is physically unusual, but because folklore marks it as a place connected to the good people. There are modern stories of roads bending around fairy trees, landowners refusing to cut them, and people warning that disturbing them invites misfortune. Skeptics see this as cultural memory, superstition, and respect for old traditions. Believers see something else, a warning that some boundaries should not be crossed. And in recent years, another interpretation has appeared. Some modern writers and paranormal researchers have suggested that fairy encounters might not be supernatural in the old religious sense, but something stranger: interdimensional contact. Beings from another layer of reality, a phenomenon that appears differently depending on the culture witnessing it. To be clear, this is speculation. There is no confirmed scientific evidence that fairies are interdimensional beings, but the theory exists because fairy folklore has always involved strange patterns, missing time, impossible places, encounters at thresholds, beings that appear human but not fully human, rules that resemble contracts, and a world that seems close enough to touch but impossible to enter safely. The official explanation is simpler. Fairy folklore grew from old beliefs, social fears, natural phenomena, religious change, and attempts to explain illness, death, luck, and the unknown. Fairy rings are fungal growth. Changelings reflect human fear and misunderstanding. The Cottingley photographs were fake. Victorian art reshaped the fairy into something smaller and more marketable. That explanation accounts for much of the history, but it does not fully explain why the stories lasted so long. Across different regions, the details change, but the warning remains surprisingly consistent. There is another world near ours. It has rules, and if you violate them, you may not come back the same. Maybe fairies were never meant to be believed in the way we believe in ordinary things. Maybe they were a language, a way for people to speak about danger in the landscape, grief in the home, temptation in the unknown, and the fear that human life is surrounded by forces we do not understand. Or maybe the old storytellers were preserving something they believed was real. Not cute, not harmless, not good, powerful, ancient, and watching from the edge of the field. The next time you see a fairy in a storybook, remember what came before the wings and glitter, the mound in the dark, the circle of mushrooms, the child who was not the same, the music coming from underground, and the one rule older than the modern fairy tale: do not follow them.